What is going on, Spanko squad, and welcome back to the channel. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and to celebrate, we're spending an entire month revisiting the decks of the GX era, all while trying to make them as competitive as possible. Now let's be real, some of these decks are gonna put up a fight, and some might not. But we're here to push them to their limit. Whether it's Heroes, Cyber Dragons, Crystal Beasts, or even the really obscure stuff, we're giving them all a shot. And if you want access to every deck profile I'll be showing this month, plus exclusive access to 4 deck lists that will not be shown here on YouTube, check out the Metafy GX month package. For just $10, you'll have access to this package for life. And that includes any updates and any changes made to these deck lists. It's the best way to keep up to date with all your favorite decks while also supporting the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe if you guys haven't already, and with that, let's get into GX month. So welcome back to another GX month deck profile, and guys, I am excited to be showcasing none other than Arcana Force. Now, Arcana Force debuted in Season 2 of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, played by the main villain, which is Sartorius, of course, and this archetype does a lot of really cool things. I think, honestly, the lore behind this archetype is actually just really cool, but in general, other than that, you actually do some pretty cool things in terms of turn skipping. Now, turn skipping is a mechanic that you don't see super often in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, and this deck does it very well. It's actually very consistent with the newest support from Suda, but yes, it's still a rogue deck, guys, at the end of the day. Let's talk about it though. So first things first is 3 Arcana Force 5, the Hierophant. This is of course your best normal summon of the deck. When it's normal summoned, you can flip a coin. Heads, you special summon a level 4 or lower Arcana monster from your deck to your side of the field, and then tails, you summon it to your opponent's side of the field. That's fine. There's actually a way to play around that, which is really cool. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this card is also really good because if you have it in your hand, you can discard this card from your hand and your opponent cannot activate cards or effects when an Arcana Force monster is summoned to your side of the field. Why is that cool? Well, it's because essentially if you summon anything and you will try to activate your effect, then your opponent can't respond to it. So it's kind of like Miscellaneousaurus for Arcana Force, which is really, really good. Then we're playing 3 the Sun. The Sun is another very important card that came out in Suda. So this card says if a card with a coin costing effect is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. Now it says if a card, not if a monster, if a card. So if you have a spell, the field spell, anything with a coin costing effect, you can special summon this card, which is very, very nice. It's also 2900 attack. So, I mean, randomly going second, it does push for a lot of damage. But then it also has another effect where if it's summoned, you toss a coin. Heads, you set a spell from your deck that has a coin tossing effect. Tails, you destroy all cards in the spell and trap card zones. Tails is not bad when you're trying to use it as a heavy storm to break your opponent's back row, but you mostly want to get heads. Now, there are ways to manipulate what you actually land on in this deck, which is very nice, and that's kind of what helps you push the FTK. I was going to say FTK. It's kind of an FTK. It's more like a turn skip, but it's kind of FTK because your opponent can't play, and then you're going to try to push for game regardless after that. Then another card from Suda is 3 Light Force. Light Force is another very powerful card. Once per turn during the standby phase, if Light Barrier is not in your field zone, you have to toss a coin. If it's tails, essentially it negates the effects of the card. However, that's not important because you're always going to want to have Light Barrier in your field zone. I'll talk about how you do that. But essentially, it has 2 effects. The first effect is fairy monsters you control gain 300 attack and defense. Again, that's just going to help you push for damage and try to push for game. But the second effect is you can discard a card, add 2 Arcana Force monsters with different names from your deck to your hand. Also, you can't special summon except for Arcana Force for the turn. That's not a problem. But it gets you into 2 cards. So it kind of is like Wishes with Eyes of Blue. Discard a card, add 2. Very, very insane. Specifically, if you don't have Light Barrier, there's actually a monster in this deck that searches Light Barrier. So that's why you definitely want to be playing 3 of the Light Force. It's very, very important. It's one of the best starters in your deck, actually. And lastly, for the new support, we are playing 3 of the Just Arcana Spread. Now, Arcana Spread is a great, great card. You toss a coin and apply an effect. If Light Barrier is on your field zone, you can just choose the effect instead, which is very nice. So it kind of removes that whole coin tossing aspect. But if it's head, you special summon a level 4 or lower Arcana Force monster from your deck. If it's tails, you can special summon 1 monster that has a coin tossing effect from your graveyard. So why is this card insane? Well, sometimes you want it to be tails. It's not always just heads. Tails is very nice sometimes because what you'll do is you'll sometimes put the world in your graveyard, and then when you put the world in your graveyard, you can spread to summon it back, which is very, very nice. It also has a graveyard effect where you can banish it from your graveyard, and then you can add from your graveyard to your hand any card that has a coin tossing effect. So that's really nice as well. It kind of recycles some of your pieces. Now moving on to the older Arcana Force cards, I guess technically this is still newer support. 3 Arcana Force the Fiend. This is the card that gets you to Light Barrier. Essentially, you discard this card, add a Light Barrier from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So it recovers it from the graveyard as well, which is really nice. And with Light Force, if you don't have access to this and you don't have access to Light Barrier, you're always going to want to search this because this is essentially going to get you to your Light Barrier, which is very important. It does have a coin tossing effect when it's summoned. Doesn't happen too often, but essentially it heads when an attack is declared involving this card, target 1 monster in the field, destroy it, and then you inflict 500 points to its controller. So you can pop a card your opponent controls, burn them. And then tails, if an attack is declared involving this card, destroy all monsters on the field. It's kind of cool. It kind of blows up the board. It's kind of like Black Rose Dragon. Again, you don't summon it too often anyways. You're mainly using it it for the effect where you're going to be able to get Light Barrier. And then lastly, we're playing one Emperor, one Empress, and one The Lovers. You're playing 3 different names because, again, with something like Light Force and some of these other cards, you need to have access to some different names so that you can actually resolve their effects, which is really nice. So I like playing these 3. Specifically, the Empress is really good because remember how I talked about the Hierophant having an effect to summon a card to your opponent's side of the field? Well, the Empress is kind of nice because when it's summoned, you toss a coin, as they all do, right? But with this one specifically, because it's on your opponent's side of the field, it's going to activate, toss a coin. Heads, when your opponent normal summons or sets a monster, you can special summon an Arcana Force monster from your hand. That's never going to matter because your opponent's not going to be playing Arcana Force. If you're playing the Arcana Force mirror, by the way, that's insane. But Tails, each time your opponent normal summons or sets a monster, you send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. So if they flip Tails and you start doing your combos, then this is going to be insane because you're going to start ripping cards out of your opponent's hand as well, which is really nice. The really cool thing is they all activate on your opponent's side of the field if you summon them with Hierophant, which makes stuff like Triple Tactics Talent live, which is absolutely insane. Lastly, we are playing 1 Arcana Force EX, the Dark Ruler, and then 1 Arcana Force. This is one of the most important cards in the deck. This is what enables your FTK / your turn skip. And then Arcana Force EX, the Dark Ruler, is a card that you're going to want to summon as well because this is a 4,000 beater that's going to be able to push for game on the follow-up, which is very nice. So you're lastly playing these 2 because Arcana Force the World essentially is what makes and breaks this deck. If you're able to resolve this, you're winning the game no matter what. The whole point of all these cards is to get to this card. So next up, of course, we're playing 3 Light Barrier. Light Barriers are very important because, I mean, it's the bread and butter of the deck. If I'm being honest with you, it makes it so that you can choose the effect instead of tossing a coin, which is the most important thing because you're always going to make everything live. And then it also has a second effect. If your opponent Arcana Force monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you gain life points equal to that monster's attack. It's kind of cool when you're going second, kind of helps you win for game. But again, you never want to go second with this deck because you always want to be able to turn skip. Then we're playing lastly the last Arcana Force card. Funny enough, there's a lot of them, right? But you have to be maxing out on them because it's very important to be playing these cards. But 3 Arcana Reading, this is the worst of the Arcana Force cards. It can be absolutely insane, but it can also be absolutely detrimental. So you toss a coin. If Light Barrier is on your field, then you can choose the effect, which is cool, I guess. But heads, you can add a card from your deck to your hand that has a coin tossing effect. So it adds any card that has a coin tossing effect, which is insane. But tails, your opponent adds 1 card from their deck to your hand. Doesn't matter what that card is. So yeah, if you land on tails, Arcana Reading can be your worst nightmare. But you land on heads, you can add anything essentially from your deck, which is insane as well. So it's kind of like a Rhoda, but it's a very risky play if you don't have Light Barrier on your side of the field. So we've talked a lot about engine, but let's talk a little bit about the non-engine that this deck plays, right? So first things first is Prosperity. You don't really go into your extra deck too much outside of your fusion monster over here. So Prosperity is really good because you're always going to want to make sure you have the cards to resolve your combo. So that's why Prosperity is really good. 1 Azaroon, this is another card that you can end on because Silhouette Rabbit's pretty much generic and it just adds another layer of disruption. 2 Triple Tactics Talent. Talent is very good as well because like I said with the Hierophant, if you're summoning one of the Arcana Force monsters to your opponent's side of the field, it's going to activate their effect, which is going to make your talent live, which means that if you want to draw 2 cards, you can draw 2 cards. You can even use the effect to take your opponent's monster and use that to either make a rank 4, make your Arcana Force fusion. But fun fact, this can make itself using Arcana Force monsters on your opponent's side of the field, so you'll never actually have to take it back because you'll always have access to fusion. But talent is really good just to draw extra cards, maybe rip a card out of your opponent's hand, make sure everything resolves, which is very nice. Then we're playing 1 Called By and 3 Crossout. So you have to be playing these ratios, and the reason you have to be playing these ratios specifically is because this deck does lose really hard to hand traps. It doesn't lose to board breakers because if your opponent has a bunch of board breakers, you're going to get your turn skip combo and they're not going to be able to activate their board breakers, but it loses to hand traps. So you have to be playing this, and of course we're playing a ton of hand traps because of Crossout. Also, because you're playing a ton of hand traps, it's not bad because if you're forced to go second, at least you'll have something to protect you. But Crossout is of course very important to make sure everything resolves. So 2 Ash Blossom, 2 Imperm, 1 Nib, 1 Veiler, 1 Magnamute, 1 Baldrake, and 1 Druid Swarm. So we're playing all of these because really these are the ones you lose to. Nibiru is very popular in today's format and you lose to Nibiru really hard in this deck. So Nib is very important, Veiler is very important. Like you have to be playing these, honestly. I don't really have to explain them. These are the most prevalent hand traps. You lose super hard, by the way, to these. So you need to be playing these to cross out them. And again, if you draw a Bastille, it's not the end of the world because at least you can draw it and use it and then use it as an extender, maybe link it away. And then if you link it away, then you get like a Druid Swarm effect potentially if you're going second. You have to be playing these because you have to protect your combos. Moving on to the extra deck over here, the one and most important card that we're playing is 3 Arcana Force EX, the Chaos Ruler. This is the most important card. The really cool thing about this card is if you don't get your turn skip off, which most of the time you will, but if you don't get your turn skip off, you can end on this, and this is like a skill drain for you. So let's talk about its effects. First things first is 3 Arcana Force monsters with different names anywhere on the field. So the really cool thing about this is because you can special summon it by sending the above cards from either field to the graveyard. So if you use the Hierophant and you put a Arcana Force on your opponent's side of the field, you can still use that monster for this. It's like a contact fusion, which is absolutely insane. It has another really cool effect. If it's special summoned, you can toss a coin.
wow, like every other Arcana Force card. But the effects are pretty good. So heads, you special summon at level 10 a Arcana Force monster from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Why is that good? Well, there's one level 10 that we talked about earlier that kind of helps you push for game, and that's the Dark Ruler, which is very, very nice. And then tails, you can add a card from your deck to your hand that has a coin tossing effect. So whether you land on heads or tails, this card is really good. But the other effect is while light barrier is on the field, your opponent cannot activate effects of monsters on the field. So it's a skill drain for you, which is really good because it gives you an alternative win condition as well, outside of just a turn skip. It's also 3,300 attack, so it's pretty big. You can push for a lot of damage. Then we're playing one IP, one SP, one Silo Hat. Really, you don't make these too often. Silo Hat's the one that you make the most. One Lina because everything is light, and it's actually pretty good right now against Blue Eyes. You can take Maiden, which is very nice. And then we're playing the one Underworld Goddess. This card is just to beat cards like Chaos Ruler and other cards that you can't otherwise beat. Then we're playing Baguska, Cowboy, Exoton Knight, Dweller, Starring Knight, and your Zeus. This is actually only 14 cards. I'll talk about why that is in a second. Starring Knight is a card I want to talk about. I'm not really going to talk about these cards. They're all just toolbox cards. But Starring Knight is pretty cool because it's 2 level 4 monsters. You can detach a material from this card, special summon a light monster from your hand. That's all it says. And what's a light monster from your hand? So you can literally just summon the world if you have this in your hand, and it kind of helps you when you break, because you never want to draw this card. You really want to get it out of your deck. But if you do end up drawing it, it's not the end of the world because you can Starring Knight to special summon it. There's no restrictions that says this card can't be summoned. There's no restrictions that said it has to be normal summon to activate its effect. It's just when this card is summoned, you toss a coin, and that's really good because worst come to worst, you can make Starring Knight, summon the world, flip a coin, and turn skip your opponent, which is really nice. So it's very nice because this kind of actually synergizes very well with the deck. And the one Zeus, of course, for all these Xyz monsters. The one card that I'm not playing here, so it's only 14. The one card that I don't have actually on me, but I 100% recommend playing it because going second sucks in this deck, is Typhon. Typhon is such an insane card because when you're going second, if you really can't push for whatever their board is, you can just make a Typhon and kind of slow down the game that way, which is very important. So definitely I think Typhon is a really good option. Additionally, I'm not showing you guys a side deck, but what you guys can also do is you can remove a lot of these like filler cards like Cowboy, Baguska. You can remove a lot of these cards over here and then just play Ultimate Slayer in your side deck and play a bunch of Ultimate Slayer targets. Because again, this deck sucks going second, and so having cards like Ultimate Slayer to break your opponent's boards can be very important. So again, that's just another option for you, but because I'm not showing you a side deck, I decided not to go that route. But if you are playing something like Ultimate Slayer, which I recommend in the side deck, then at that point, I would actually switch these out for a bunch of Ultimate Slayer targets.
So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy. That is my take on Arcana Force for the March 2025 format. Now, unfortunately, Arcana Force really only has one way to play, and that is the FTK. However, it's quite easy to get this FTK off, or turn skip, which is kind of like an FTK. And then if you do get that turn skip off, you're pretty much winning the game every single time. And that's why we play crossout cards like that, to make sure your FTK or your turn skip goes in every single time. So thank you guys all for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. Make sure if you guys want to see this list as well as all our other lists and updates for life, to check out the Metafy for just $10. You guys have access to it forever, including 7. It was 4, but it's now 7 exclusive Metafy Decklists. You guys are only going to find it there. So thank you guys all for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. With that, Spanko signing out. Peace.